everybody. Hello, Cocoa Verse. Hello, chocolate people. Welcome to the Chocolate Life Podcast. I am your host, Mr. Chocolate, and once again, we have our resident co host with us, Coach K. And today's topic, the origin of anti Black politics. Um,
Politi- Political anti-blackness, Mr. Chocolate. I'm not sure. Not sure how you got that title, but it's political anti-blackness. That's the subject. So we can actually lead them, not because you're. Go ahead.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, you get excited.
Oh my goodness. Oh, uh,
I
yeah.
just want us to be on the same page, and I want us to have the audience know what we're doing instead of reversing it.
Gotcha. Oh my goodness. Um, where do I start?
Hi, audience. Well, while you're getting yourself together, the way you start, you're going to give them the definition of political. Hi, audience. We're happy you guys are continuing
Oh,
to
okay,
join.
yeah, got that.
I hope you guys continue to join in and not just join in so you can listen for educational purpose, but so you can listen for empowerment because we're on a cuspice of empowering melanated people around the world. I've seen a lot of different videos showing how young people are just tired of their government. And it's melanated people. And I'm going to continue to say melanated people because even pale skinned people came from melanated people. There were no pale skinned people as people understand this concept of race and ethnicity. There were no ethnicities. Ethnic race is just another word for ethnicity. Everybody who came over here and started accessing political power, they did it with two. They did it with one structured base because that is what the census set up. You either white or you're non-white, which means you are black. Means you go under subjugation, and that's been the rule. But now, since everybody is trying to acquiesce to white power and white dominance and how they can get power, you find out. We talked about this a few weeks ago. How people can use all of these otherings for their advantage. The operative word here is I'm not black, I'm biracial. I'm not black, my culture is this. I'm not black, I'm gay. I'm not black. All of these, I'm not black, but there's still anti-blackness. And anti-blackness goes for anybody in this country who does not identify as white. And even when you do identify as white, when you come from other countries, you were probably in some form or fashion a non-white. Since non-white, I mean, being white is a European construct. It's not biology. It's more psychology than anything. And what we have to do is learn ourselves, teach ourselves, educate ourselves how to retrain our brain and engage in higher thinking for self. And the reason I'm focusing more on self than the collective at times, it is because if we can't gain insight into our own psyche, if we cannot be empowered to have self esteem, um, validation, and appreciation of self, then continuing to talk every week is a waste. I hope I'm not wasting my energy by doing this. I'm hoping you guys are actually putting forth effort in you. You are the investment. And the more we can invest in ourselves, we build a collective. That's just automatic because when like minds join together, iron sharpen iron. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build an ironclad philosophy where we are teaching our mindsets how to be open, engaging, and free thinkers. I'm going to give you information every week, and I will continue to repeat this. I'm going to give you information every week where it's up to you to challenge yourself on how this is applicable to you and your environment, wherever you live in this world, whether you live in the United States, whether you live in the Caribbean or the Virgin Islands, and all of that is Central America, or even if you live in South America, Southeast Asia, Europe, or what the first mass body of land, which is now called the continent of Africa. I'm going to call it the continent because that is the origin of humanity. So I will interchange that and I will tell you, if I say the continent, then I'm talking about the place that they now call Africa, because Africa wasn't originally called Africa. Nice name that I can't pronounce, now start with an A, but originally it has been called Eden for all you Bible people. Once upon a time, it was called Kemet, not just a part of Egypt. Once upon a time, it was called Negro Land. Look at the maps before the 1500s. You got all of these different names that they have given to this body of land that was the cradle of civilization. And it's up to us to see how we fit into this and how we can educate self and others to become higher thinkers. And in order to do that, we have to learn to understand how words became weapons. And words became weapons, and philosophies and ideas and concepts. All of these became weapons in the 15th century. In the 15th century, the 17th century. 17th century because it was 1600. 17th century when Europeans decided they wanted to create this thought process, where we get to the origin. And this is where we want to start tonight. We know that we can go back farther and give you guys insight into the Romans and the Greeks and how the society then looked kind of like it looks now. You got, as you call it, a melting pot. But they did use the names that we're using now. So we're just going to start with the political structure in the United States. The political structure in the United States is based on whiteness or white supremacy, whichever way you want to use it. But in order to have whiteness, the dichotomy had to be set up to be anti-Black. So anti-Blackness is the foundation of this regime we call the United States of America. And what I want to do is let Mr. Chocolate come in and just give us a definition of what it means to be political. Because if we understand what political means, that is an action. What it means to be political, then we can actually go from there. And then we will trade off information for a moment. But I just wanted him to give the definition of what it means to be political, and where in the 17th century this concept of being white or whiteness, because in order to address anti-Blackness, we have to also address whiteness. So with that, Mr. Chocolate, if you would, give our audience the definition of political and where that concept of white or whiteness come from.
All right. Political is an adjective. Political relating to the government or the public affairs of a country. Similar definition, governmental, relating to the ideas or strategies of a particular party or group in politics. Another similar definition, as in an activist, interested in or in the activity of being active in politics, motivated or caused by a person's belief in their politics.
Okay, could I interject for a moment?
Yes.
Audience, if you notice everything he said about political, it means you have to be involved. It's an adjective, so that means it's a descriptive word for us. It's not a noun. Those are people, they become politicians, but it's actively engaging in whatever you deem is necessary for society. So, one thing that has been a continuum in the broader conversation when it's not a political year, I mean a presidential year, too many people say, well, I'm not political. Now, from his definition, we all should be political because we are actively engaging into our society and we are deciding that we want to participate. A society cannot run without having politics or being political. It's just like your community. If somebody decide they want to just destroy your community and then you do nothing because you said, well, that's not my business, then guess what? Your community goes down. And if you have a whatever house you live in, or whatever school you go to, if you don't fight for that, or your children are getting beat up, or you are the person who getting beat up, if you don't say, I'm going to take a stand, then guess what? It falls apart. Doesn't matter what it is. The thing is, we all have to participate in society. Otherwise, society become one-sided. And Black people have been fighting for this society ever since it was set up to be a society. Black people fought in the colonizers' war because the colonizers was coming from Europe, and we've always had a spirit of community, and that's the thing. Europeans have not been there. They have not been communal. They have been clannish. Clannish and community are not the same. Clan means you just out for your particular group. Community means you want everybody to be engaged, everybody to be a part, everybody to have some type of voice, some type of autonomy. If you in your house, I'm not to come to your house and try to tell you how to run it. But when it comes to the whole society, we must come to a consensus. Everybody in the community. That's why in certain uh, uh, blocks of housing, they have covenants. Now, we're not going to talk about how the covenants were set up to keep Black people out. I'm just simply using it for a definition that a covenant, and you got, just say all of these houses are $500,000. They have a covenant because they want everybody to participate so the whole community can thrive. You have certain things, nobody's telling you what you can do in your house, but when it comes to the whole community, everybody should be willing to go along with these particular um, guidelines. But we know from the United States, the political structure has never included us. And what we're going to do, I'm going to give it back to Mr. Chocolate, and so he can give the definition of this manifestation that started in the 17th century, and now they have put it into a booklet. They have taken all of the dynamics from across the globe, specifically how the dynamics have played out in the United States, and they have put it in a booklet. And now they intend, and when I say they, I mean the lawmakers of the country who have been working for more than 40, 50 years now, because they've been working on this since the late 70s and early 80s, to completely dismantle anything that have to do with staying Black people or working toward our benefits. That is the reason we have to continue in our fight for justice and humanity, mainly for us, but without us, the whole world is going to crash. It just is. Okay, so Mr. Chocolate, if you would give us a little bit of insight on the definition of whiteness, and then give us the history of some of the policies or the laws. And we want the audience to see how many policies that were set in place in the early part of before it was as you were here. Mr. Chapter's going to tell us about some laws that were put into place before 1776. So, with that, I yield back to Mr. Chocolate.
All right. Wait, you know what? Hold up. Phone is freezing up on me.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. All right. Whiteness, a noun. Definition number one: the property or quality of being white in color. The quality of being very pale. Definition two: the fact or state of belonging to a human group having light colored skin. And those were the two definitions.
But tell us about when did people start using the concept of white? Because there was no concept of white before the 15th century. So when did that actually start become a thing? Because we
It
know
actually it
because
actually be,
go ahead.
it actually became a thing around 1613 when a playwright by the name of Thomas Middleton used it in his play The Triumphs of Truth. Um, it was a medieval pageant to honor British Lord Mayor, and that was the first time that the term whiteness was used, and it referred to Europeans as white people. And yeah, that was the first time the word was used in 1613 in his play.
Okay. But what I'm trying, audience, what guys, what I'm trying to get you to see is what Mr. Chaka just said. Whiteness was referred to as Europeans, specifically people. Wasn't this play written in Britain?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're talking about people of English descent or heritage, whichever way you want to use it, or that part of the world, because we know about the time the people who are in this place they call England, they may have taken on the identity of being English or from England. That does not mean that their background was actually English. That is why it is so important for us to learn background and backstories, because this is a playwright. So therefore, this man is on stage. Okay, this is not um, this is not a historian. This is a man who's using his art to tell a story. And for whatever reason, England or British or European, Northern Europeans, they liked that concept and they brought it to these waters uh, when they came over here. So when they came over here, they never claimed to be British. They never owned their own identity of being British. The concept, if we look in the documentation, we will see uh, the Europeans fighting, and they call themselves, they call it, first of all, they call it the Revolutionary War. But before there was a Revolutionary War, there was other wars. So what I want you to do now is just tell our audience some of because the Revolutionary War is 1776. There were other
Mm.
things going on before then. So let's just go through some of the laws that were put in place. And audience, what we're trying to get you to see is the British set up companies. If you can compare that with today's corporations who run America, we're actually going backwards because the corporation uh, called the Virginia Company, called the Hudson Bay, and Massachusetts Bay. All of these are companies, and Massachusetts had over 500 different plantation in their colony, even though they said 13 colonies, and I'm not sure what colony mean in their mindset, but the Massachusetts Bay had a lot of colonies. All of these fractions of people who had been warring for almost 1,000 years, well, over 1,000 years, and they came over here because they were experiencing what you call a mini or a little ice age. And little ice age simply means they couldn't grow crops and they were starving and they were killing each other. It's kind of like what they're manufacturing now. They are great at killing and destroying and fighting. That's what Europeans have mastered. So that belongs to Europe. Regardless, is they're called Swazi, because Swazi, if you tell Germans that they were called Swazi, if you call Russians and call them Swazi, either they don't know their history, they're lying about their history, or they're happy just to be a part of the white ethno state because the melanin and the deficiency has bleached them to a place that they can embrace this mindset until they forgot their own history. Because it wasn't that long ago until, unless you was a WASP. And I don't know if any of you guys know what a WASP is, but that was the definition of originally for white people. A WASP is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And those people were from what you call England or northeast, northwest European. That's what a WASP was. So if you were Italian, if you Greek, if you were Russian, you were not a WASP. So the rabbit hole goes deep. And everybody who came over here and took on the dynamic and forgot that they used to be a part of the fighting fraction against the very people they say they are part of. That's what we see now. And now the WASP have developed a concept called Project 2025. And they have taken all of their history and put it into one big book, almost 1,000 pages, so that they can create this dynamic of having white supremacy for perpetuity. But it's not going to happen because we're going to keep fighting. So what, Mr. Chocolate, what I want you to do is just give us a little bit about some of these laws that was put into place after 1607, because 1607 was the time when Europeans came over here and they started starving. They knew nothing about the land. They knew nothing about farming. The indigenous people of the land, as usual, we befriend people, and just because they look strange and we have not seen people look like this ever, of course, it would be interesting, but at the same time, we have to use a little bit more uh, guarding our spirit now. I can say they didn't guard their spirit, but that's neither here nor there. We can go back and study history, and we can see where um, the indigenous people may not have guarded their spirit. But why would you guard your spirit when you never ran into a spirit like that? You
Right.
you kind of think everybody is human, and just because you have a spat or you have a war with people, if you have a war, you win the war, you just people you beat, they become a part of your community. That's how people used to settle their differences, but not Europeans. Europeans, you're going to either do what we say or you die. That is a European concept. European of winning wars like they're doing right now. If we don't win, and it's always based on cheating, okay? Always moving the goalposts. If we don't win, then it's a war. You hear that continually with these people who call themselves MAGA. I'm not sure what that means, but for them it means Make America Great. They love using coded language, and none of these people really can tell you who
E-
by all their
exactly
fanatics.
what it means.
They can't tell you what making America, when was America great. They cannot tell you that, and they really cannot tell you what it means to be white. I can tell you what it means to be black. It means that I have been placed at the bottom of the economic, political scale in this country. That's what it means to be black. That's what it means to be melanin. That's what it means to be indigenous. I'm a part of all of that. But for political purposes, I'm going to use black because they have white power ruling. So I'm gonna use the bifurcation of words, black, white, because it was Europeans who created the two concepts. We didn't create the concept, but the irony of it, blackness. If we go to the deeper root, it goes back to the black dot, the melanin in our brains. But white people don't know that, so that's a conversation for another day. That's higher learning, because that's where we get our empathy, that's where we get our intuition, that's where the brain stem operate. That is the black dot. That is a part of the melanin. That is a part of the stardust that we're made from. We're connected to the earth. But if nobody has been teaching that concept in any school or any seminary, we have been lacking. And I'm not, quote unquote, putting the onus on melanated people, because melanated people have not been teaching each other for a very long time. That is the reason why for this podcast. Because I'm on the internet a lot trying to gather information that I think is befitting for young people, because you guys are the ones, the future of the world, regardless if you take a hold of that mantle or not. You're the future, not people who are 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. They're not the future. They should be being good elders and teaching all of the young people. But I digress. If you would, Mr. Chocolate, just give us a few of those, some of those laws. And what I want to do is in the last part of the podcast, just trying to tie those laws that you're going to talk about together, and hopefully our audience will be able to go back and make sense of Project 2025, that they are trying to create the same thing that they're saying that other countries are doing, but they're being covert in doing it. And that is set up a dictatorship, a monarch dictatorship. Okay? So,
All right. 1640, the Virginia Company came up with the John Punch decision, or the John Punch Law. John Punch was a black indentured servant who had left with a white indentured servant, and when they came back and were sentenced, he was subjugated to life as a slave versus The white indentured servant was allowed to serve, I believe, a few months in jail and was able to go back to being a servant. But the black man
Okay.
was relegated to slavery. And that was
Okay.
1640. 16 1669 was the Casual Killing Act. Um, if you were a slave and you were away from, if you were a slave and you were away from your plantation without any type of identifying, uh, without any type of identification identifying you to that particular plantation, you could be killed casually. And yeah, um, let me see. That was 1669. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back a little bit. 1639, there was the No Armed Negroes Law. So if you were a person of color or a slave, whether you were black or native, you were not allowed to have a weapon in the state of Virginia. And that was 1639. Um, then there was and then there's the born slave law. So if a child was born to a slave mother, that child was born a slave and was treated as such, and they made that into law in 1670. Uh,
If you would, tell us the law of 1650, 62, 67, and 1682.
okay. Ah,
Well, while you looking that up, let me give it to the audience, and then therefore they can look it up for themselves, and they can see some of these laws that you are looking at. If you guys want to actually look at what we're looking at, I would suggest you go to the website is through Berkeley Education, and the name of the link is going to it's going to be the history of slavery in America, and what you will see is all of this information that we're talking about. And what I was trying to get him to go over. John Castor, John was I guess a common name back in the 1600s, because you got John Castor. John Castor, there was a law in 1954 where he became the first legal slave in America. That was Anthony Johnson. There are a number of Europeans who like to say that. Uh, he was an indentured servant, and you guys may not be aware, but indentured servant, all of these are coded language, because 1650 to 1705, all of these are slave codes. So mind you, if this is not coded language, then they wouldn't have slave codes. All of this is coded language, and I'm gonna get there to indentured servant versus slavery in a minute. But in 1650, there was a thing called Negroes are not allowed to have arms. That's what he just talked about. In 1662, what's the child status? In other words, your mom is a slave, you a slave. In 1667, baptism did not make you free. Okay, you still was a slave. I mean, you were still bondage. So many of people, indigenous people, became baptized. Okay, because Europeans said from the Bible, if you baptize, you free. But that didn't make indigenous people free. So that is another reason for people who are still tied to religion. Notice I did not say spirituality. If you're still tied to religion, you may want to go back and revisit that concept. Why are you still tied to religion? Our spirits need to be free, and your spirit can adjust to any philosophy that is helpful. And I'm using words to describe words because that's what Europeans have been doing for 4 centuries, to keep us in bondage, to keep us subjugated, because they have been using literal words that they put into laws, and their laws became laws to protect them. They call us human property. Okay? That's the reason they set up this thing that they call slave catchers. Slave catchers were the white people who got their freedom once they got over here. Notice Mr. Chocolate talked about 2 indentured servants who ran away. They were indentured servants because they came from some part of the Americas. When I say the Americas, I'm talking Central America and I'm talking South America. That means white plantation owners in North America bought them from somebody either in the Caribbean or in South America, or they bought them from a pirate, which means now you have to pay whatever that other person say that you owe them. In other words, these people didn't have a whole bunch of money that came over here. They're just like the politicians now. They prostitute themselves out to make money from the company that they work for. Most of the company, the Virginia company was owned by people, rich people in Britain. It was not owned by these people who came over here. These people were what you would call overseers and masters. And I don't mean like master as in you own everything. You are the overseers because a number of these people never set foot specifically in the Sea Islands or Hilton Head. If you study the history of that part of the Americas, it was the slaves who ran these plantations. But Europeans never going to tell you that. There's a movie called Daughters of the Dust. Daughters of the Dust is about all of the Geechee people, and Geechee was a language that they cultivated and developed from the people that lived in Sea Island in South Carolina and Hilton Head and Myrtle Beach, all of that area. They cultivated not only their culture from the west coast of Africa with the indigenous people here. We've always been a blended people. They cultivated their language like the Haitians did when they cultivated their language. They call Creole. Now that is uh, West Indies Creole. There's also Creole that they speak in
Central America.
Central America. And where's the first place? Where is Amber Rose from?
Guyana, South
No,
America.
no. Amber Rose. Amber Rose is from the Cape Verdes. The Cape Verdes
Oh, Cape Verde. Okay, yeah.
also have a form of Creole.
Creole.
So Creole is a mixture of different dialects that you create your own language. So seaports have been famous. New Orleans, okay, Creole. Seaports have been famous, and you notice all of these are seaports. Have been famous for adopting and making their own languages. Down in Louisiana, Cajun just simply means these were the slaves who were from European descent, and now they call themselves white. But they were the Cajuns. They were still slaves. Although they're never going to tell you that, but it's up to us to point that out to everybody. Europeans were slaves, just like indigenous people, brown people from the Americas, and brown people from the place we call Africa, the place we call South America. They played musical chairs with us. Anytime um, Black people decided they wanted to do an uprising, they moved us around. They moved us around to England, not yet over to Spain, because mostly Spain took most of the slave ports out of Rhode Island. Rhode Island was a famous slave port. That's another piece of history. Uh, that did musical chairs, so they had an influx. This was a prosperous business. Slaves occupied the Caribbeans. That's why you have people like Nicki Minaj and Rihanna and Kamala Harris's parents who will they quote real quickly they are from some their island, but their islands were full of slaves, white slaves, black slaves, and the more you can make them have sex and produce a better crop, and for the slave owners, the better crop simply means you are a lighter complexion. So the colorism didn't start with us. It just people, black people don't know where colorism came from. It came from the slave market. But all of these different laws, if you notice, these laws were already being cultivated and refined. That's the word I'm looking for. They were being refined even before this regime became a country, and they were making money off of this enterprise. Slavery was a big enterprise, and they still trying to keep it an enterprise. Now it's called human trafficking. The governments participate in it. That includes the government here. Ask yourself or go research, why is it that nobody could tell you what um, Jeffrey Epstein, where he got so many, why he got his billions from? Jeffrey Epstein was never really anything but he was a teacher for a short period of time. And it was Bill Barr's father who gave him a job. So you have to ask the question, how did this man get to be a billionaire to own an island and do all these things? You have to ask yourself. We still see it. We see it in people like Diddy. We see it in Jay-Z. How do these people get to be billionaires when they never did anything to be that level, to move that kind of money? They haven't. So just like the Europeans don't have that kind of qualification, but you will ask that quicker when it comes to a Jay-Z or a Diddy, when they all run in the same circles. And the only thing these people have done is learn how to uh, continue to be against blackness, even when their skin become dark, like Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, uh, Jay-Z and Beyonce. They are protecting their money. So we have to know that anti-black, these policies are being a political pun for anti-blackness, don't belong to Europeans by themselves. That belong to everybody that in the community they call coons, bootlicks, tethers, any of those names to talk about these people are not really us, not just not like us, they're just not us. We have to be smarter in order to address the anti-blackness, because this country is anti-black. It has always been anti-black. And just as people say Kamala Harris is not for us, there's another person that I thought of today who has a prominent spot on MSNBC. She is not us either, and nobody ever calls her out. And that's Joy Reid. Joy Reid is not our experience. Joy Reid, like Kamala Harris, came over here, an immigrant, and somehow because they went to a school and got a job and start hanging out with the black people, somehow they get a position to say that they speak for the whole community. And we have to be very careful on just okaying any of that because these people are still looking at money. They are no different than Drake, and I'm always going to bring Drake up probably until the day I die because people will talk about Drake that he cosplayed, and Drake could very well have not done the stuff he did. And I found out today that Lil Wayne actually was his mentor, and I knew that, but I learned that Lil Wayne told Drake, don't try to talk about the streets. Don't try to talk about a life you never knew. Talk about what you did in Canada. That's where you from. But did Drake follow that advice? Absolutely not. Drake started trying to talk like he was um, 50 Cent or uh, Tupac Shakur on a different scale or a DMX. He tried to pretend that he was these people. Likewise, Kamala Harris have many of these people who have worked to be our detriment, and they have practiced anti-Black politics also, and that's the sororities and the fraternities. If you go back and you research, and some of you guys may be a part of some of these uh, fraternities and sororities, but you have to ask yourself, why do people punctuate sororities and fraternities and call them the Boule class? That has a real um, black eye on the community. And even if we participated or used to participate, those things were never set up for our good. They were set up to keep us, quote unquote, in our places. And if you became a part of these quote unquote sororities and fraternities, you got the better jobs because that's all it was about. That is still coded language. They're just like coded language in the Constitution. The only difference is that's a part of social order. Whereas the political structure, it becomes law. And these are the laws that they have been trying out in places like Florida, where Ron DeSantis decided he want to put laws on the books, say anti-woke. Think about that for a moment, audience. If you are not awake, that means that anybody can use you, regardless if you use it metaphorically or literally. If you are not awake, you can be taken advantage of. So we got to take our stuff back and even challenge people like the Make America Great Again. We have to challenge people to ask them, what does woke mean? Because for them, it's a derogatory statement, but it's also a cover for them. It's almost like saying, well, that's a nigger. That's a nigger phrase. You're not going to call a person a nigger because most of the time you probably get a black eye. But you can use, well, that's anti-woke, or that's urban, or that's thug. All of that means that those are coded words to talk about Black people. And we have to start pushing back on that. Because Ron DeSantis, as I stated, he put laws on the book to remove stuff from the schools. That looks like what Caesar did, what Ptolemy did. That's very ancient. So when Europeans first came over here, they couldn't read because they spoke Gaelic, most of them. They were sent over here to learn how to work, period. Schools only started so they can educate people to work in the factories. And instead of the poor whites, poor Europeans, poor Dutch, because they didn't have their whiteness up until 1690, when after the Beacon War or Bacon War, whichever way they want to call it, the Bacon War, they fought against this man who was the governor of the colony at the time. Now think about that. This is not a country at the point that they're fighting what they call a riot. And it's a riot where all of the poor people are fighting against the establishment. But instead of staying together to fight for the betterment of all the poor people, the slave owners convinced the poor slaves. Remember, Mr. Chocolate just told you the laws had already began to discriminate based on color. Black indentured servants or black slaves got harsher punishment than people from Europe. Europeans could live out their contract and become free. It was John Punch who the courts decided that not just him, now notice that it said he would be slave for life, but his sentence became an indictment on all Black people. Don't miss that. So therefore, when the laws came down 15 years later, when we was talking about the babies born, they are slave. Because now they have made this, they have cemented that you become a slave for life. There is no way that you come out of that after John Punch, because that was profit. That was profit for Europeans. So Europeans have always profited off of. So when you see people like that lady that was in that Australian lady trying to do a break dance, there is some money to be made doing something to disparage and actually to make light of any art form we've ever done, because breakdancing was created by Black people. Okay.
Oh, can I speak on that right quick?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
She is a cultural studies professor that teaches the
I know.
history of hip hop.
I know that, but that's sad. And secondly, you still have to ask the question. So, what does that mean? Does white people get to study us and think they become an expert on our lived experience? Because that's pretty much what she said. She said, "I teach."
Mm-hmm.
You can't teach an experience. You can't teach a slave narrative. That is a lived experience. So we have to, like I just stated, we have to start pushing back. You don't become a quote unquote doctor of African American study and you're a white person and you don't have a lived experience. I don't care how many books you read. That dog just not gonna hunt. But Europeans think they can sit anything in writing, and just because they give themselves accolades, they give themselves uh, uh, diplomas, that they have become so you become an expert on all of the emotion, all of the stress, all of the psychological warfare, and all of that. You become a professional and an expert on my life, and you've never been in my life. How does make that make sense to me? That lady was horrible, and the more I hear her
Man,
story, the more I hear her talking about I'm a B girl. A B girl from what? That's like T.I. who brought that female over here. And if Black people says no, it's a wrap. Nick, what was her name? Azalea. What
Iggy
was her name?
Azalea.
Iggy.
Iggy
Iggy
Azalea.
And somehow, but we have to start looking at whatever we're doing in life. Yes, we have a profession to do, but if you're trying to appropriate, because T.I. brought this lady around, like, what are you doing? And she said, well, I grew up kind of like the Eminem things, but everybody don't even know Eminem whole story. You got to start asking questions. How is the person who actually put Eminem on, he's dead, but Eminem is still alive? Make that make sense. Dr. Dre was not the person who brought Eminem on. Young man in Detroit brought Eminem on, who actually put shoes on Eminem's feet when he was walking around with no shoes on. So that's the life. But then you have to, like I say, you have to ask the question: how is it this person's dead and Eminem is still alive? I'm not saying Eminem had anything to do with it. I'm simply stating we have to start digging deeper so we can own our own story, so we can tell our own story. Nobody can tell your story better than you can, and that's what that is the reason for having this discussion after discussion. Nobody, and the more we come together as a unit, we can learn how to educate each other, and you guys can learn how to be on point, to not just tell the one person's story. You can tell a whole group story, your whole family background. You can tie it into uh, 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 something that happened in the 1800, then in 1800, then 2000, up until the present. You can be able to do that, but we have to have some type of continuity on how we address our stories, our issues. That means we have to become politically savvy. We can't do it without knowing politics. We can't, because we got people trying to tell us who to vote for, and that's your decision. Hopefully you vote for whoever is going to bring benefits to you and your people. And if they not, then you got to ask yourself, why are you voting for this person? You have to ask yourself. You don't have to wait on somebody else to ask. It's looking right now that the United States is going to decide Kamala Harris is going to be president, regardless of what's going on, because Donald Trump cannot keep his mouth closed, and he is shooting himself in the foot every day. And some of these people who have loved white privileges, they really don't want to live under a dictatorship. So we can actually, as I said before, we can hold our vote if that's what you choose to do, until you see somebody who's really trying to answer and do some things that address your concerns in your community. Because that's what politics is about. It's about getting resources, economic resources for you. That is what all the other groups do, even when they are not even a legal citizen here. I saw people in my neighborhood, and maybe you guys seen it too across the country. Uh, I came down the street and there was something going on at the church, and they had these orange and red and blue flags. I'm going, that's not a United States flag. Well, lo and behold, this morning I saw that many people from Venezuela were protesting. Well, these are the same people are never going to protest when Black people get killed in the street. Sonia Massey, probably Black people can count their hands. I mean, count on one hand or two hands. How many other people, other than Black people, came out to protest for Sandra Massey getting killed in her home? Just like the little child who was a Palestinian who got killed at the beginning of the genocide in Israel, simply because he was a Palestinian child. This was a 7-year-old. Now, I'm almost sure that his mom was not allowing him to make any kind of bomb or anything to carry on his back, that he probably was carrying a backpack if he had that. But this is the kind of stuff that we keep seeing, the dynamics. And yes, everybody's going to learn how to fight, but we need to learn how to fight for us first. If people want to join and in our fight, because we are the foundation, and that's what I want you guys to start learning. Black people are the foundation of this thing we call the Americas, specifically North America. And we have been in this fight ever since the 1600s. We have been fighting. Because think about it. Europeans decided they wanted to fight the indigenous people, and they didn't want them to have arms. Well, that's what Europeans did for all of us. You couldn't have arms until a long time. Men could not have voting rights until the 15th Amendment. So Black men, that is. J.D. Vance is talking about going back to the time when they had head rights simply in the head of the household. That's why they IRS still use what they call head of household. That comes from Europeans all of these laws, I'm telling you, all of the laws that we have were set up with Europeans in mind. And that's what they're trying to go back to. Where Europeans had all of the benefits and we had nothing. And when I say we, I mean everybody else, but specifically Black melanated people who are indigenous to this struggle right here. Not talking about people who immigrated in the 60s like Kamala Harris or in the 70s or however old Joy Reid or any of these other people or Roland Martin. I'm not talking about them. Or Sheila Jackson Lee, who just died recently. Not talking about her. Not talking about them. Because they put many of these people on these uh, political stages to be politicians. And somewhere in their psyche, they still are emulating wherever they're from. Now, it's good if they want to talk about the Congolese or the people from the Caribbean, but you're not in the Caribbean. So they're still not speaking for us, even though they will give any immigrant a job over Black people who are indigenous to this country. Most Black people who are indigenous to this country, they were stripped of their indigenous long before the Europeans who had their names on the roads, okay? And then they developed what they called a Dawes Roll. The Dawes Roll became a archetype to put all of the all of the Black people under another category and erase them and then put the white people. And when I say white, I'm talking about a mindset now, okay? A mindset, not just the politics, because the politics have given them the right to call themselves indigenous, but at the same time, they act white. So the rabbit hole gets deeper, and all of these white becomes synonymous with so many different things, but more important, white becomes I'm not Black. So you could be Chinese, you could be Japanese, you could be quote unquote biracial, you could be Nick Fuentes, who is, I think he's Mexican and European, but he calls himself a white supremacist. What was the man name who killed Trayvon Martin?
George Zimmerman.
George Zimmerman. Now, with the name Zimmerman, I would think that part of his heritage just might be of the white Jewish people, because white Jews don't even know that there are Black Jews. So go figure. Just like white Muslims pretend they don't understand Black Muslims don't think like them. So it's always the dynamics of Black and white. India is now fighting in the streets because 12 years ago, a young female was raped at the school. She was a physician. 12 years later, just 2 weeks ago, or I think 2 weeks, may have been last week, same thing. So we got this patriarchal system, and I asked an Indian person, so when did you guys become patriarch? Because most people on the continent or in Europe or in Asia, they will talk about their culture, but they themselves, if they're under 30, they have no history because nobody has been teaching that some of these dynamics that they have embraced belong to Europeans. Indians used to didn't kill females simply because they were females, because this caste system was set up under the British rule. But Europeans, not most of the Indians don't know that. I'm talking about people from the place they call India. They have a a policy where they stone people, shame, honor. That really didn't come from the Indian culture that was prior to Islam and the British. Because I just said Islam, I talked about it, that's a religion. And then the British, that is a military force. So with those two dynamics playing out, that's the same thing we see here. A political force that have stripped us of our indigenous, our lineage, our legacy, And now we have the same dynamics where you have the as young people, it's the battle of the sexes. We have to do better, and we do better by learning what it is we want to see in the political arena for ourselves. The only way we can do that is to start digging deep, understanding what political anti-blackness is. It's simple. It's against you. Regardless, if you don't understand the coded language, you must learn to know that there is a language that's talking about you, even when it does not call you by name. But we have to be bold enough to challenge whatever the narrative is when it's trying to demean our humanity. And I think that's enough for this evening. What do you think, Mr. Chocolate?
I think we, I think we could, I think that's all we could give
Oh,
for right
as I
now.
well, as I tell you guys, we only have an hour, and if we're trying to break down different concepts, we may be able to break down two or three, but it is so much information that we can do if we had. I mean, if we grow, if we continue to grow, we will come back and revisit some of these concepts. We will take your questions and we will break them down. The more you write in questions, the more we know what you don't know. Right now, we don't know what anybody knows because right now you guys are listening and you may be passing information along, but we're not getting the feedback. So we're just asking you to give us some feedback so we can stretch the narrative. Um, I don't make any bones that, yeah, I'm a wealth of information, but the information serves no purpose if I'm the only one who have it. I want to share it with you so you can have it, so you can share it with others. Kind of like what Tupac said. Um, Tupac made the statement after the police bashed his head in for jaywalking. That's it, jaywalking. Imagine that. Just living your life and you get your head bashed in. So now you are a threat to the community and to the nation. You got a vice president saying that uh, this man's music need to be taken off the shelves, and he is wise enough to know that he was a threat just by speaking and challenging people to do things. Not that he was trying to kill anybody. That was never his nature. His mom taught him, uh, first of all, the beauty of being a black man, since she raised him to be a black man, and the beauty of loving yourself. His mom taught him that. His mom taught him her struggles and how she came through uh, becoming familiar with Bobby Seals and introducing to the Black Panthers, and how she could channel the energy that she was uh, just wrapped in bondage and rage, and she was able to channel it. So that's what she taught him to do, how to channel his energy. That's what I would like for all of us to learn to do, how to channel our energy. But it comes from focusing on us and learning how to tell our own stories, uh, discover some of the beauty of some of the people that we just know by name or don't know by name. We don't know any of their backstories or how they became who they were. Tupac is just one of them. And the young people today, they love they love to call Tupac's name, and I'm not talking about the ones who really studied Tupac and follow the music. I'm talking about people like the Jada Pinkett Smiths who you want to use Tupac's name, but there is nothing about your life that matches what this young man was about. That's what I mean when I say people like to throw names around. Politicians do the same thing. I remember Bernie Sanders and also John Lewis talking about, I was with Martin Luther King. But what did you do? Or what are you doing to help melanated people? Absolutely nothing. So we have to learn to know people like to throw names around to say they know stuff, but when it's all said and done, they just want to make money for themselves and leave all of us at the bottom of the scale. So I want us to be like Abraham Traore. He has become my new favorite person because that young man is doing such amazing things in Burkina Faso as the president. And he still calls himself the transitional president. He does not own the name. He said, I'm a general. But that's beautiful. He's 35 years old and very humble, but he is making moves in his country that these old people who have been presidents for 10 and 15 years have not done, because he loves the people. They don't. They love power. So it doesn't matter if your skin is melanin. If you don't love the people, you just like the Europeans, the pale skinned Negroes who don't like us. They came from us, but they don't like us. And that's what I want you guys to start knowing. Europeans came from us, but we got to ask the question, who you? And that's how I want to end it tonight. I hope you guys have a good evening, a good week, and we'll check you later.
All right. Disclaimer. We are not pushing any political agenda or any religious agenda. We're just passing on information. Please check out The Chocolate Life on multiple platforms: Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Jam, Pandora, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Castbox, and any other platforms. For all questions and comments, please send an email to therealchocolatelife@gmail.com. Well, everybody, we just hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay vigilant, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. All right, be safe, chocolate people. That's it for now. And this is The Chocolate Life. All right, bye, everybody.